Well, I remember I was in Los Angeles a couple years back, a lot of years back, like maybe 20 years back. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but I was in Los Angeles on a missions trip. It was this kind of thing where we were going there to the inner city to try to minister and reach out to some people who were on the lower rung of the economic strata. Particularly homeless people is where we were working. And I remember I was walking downtown Los Angeles, and I walked past this one gigantic building, and there was a guy laying there on the ground. And I struck up a conversation with him, and I just started talking to him about his life and what it was like to be living a homeless life on the street. And I started asking him some spiritual questions, and we got a conversation going. And eventually we got to the point where I was asking him if he was satisfied with his life the way it was. Because of course I was trying to do that standard Christian turn, where you go up to someone who's not satisfied with their normal life in every respect, and you say, Jesus is the answer. And you know, sometimes that is the best thing possible to do, and sometimes it's not exactly the right tactic, because they've got a spiritual thing going on inside them that they're not aware of. And so I asked this guy, are you satisfied with your life? And I thought, as a homeless dude living on the street, he would easily say no. But actually he said, yes, I'm totally satisfied with my life. And I said, what? You can't be serious. You're living here on the street. He goes, dude, I make $100 a day just laying here. And that changed my world. I remember standing there and I thought, dude, make some space. You know, I was going to join him because something was wrong with that picture. If one guy can make $100, then maybe two of us together can get even more sympathy. I don't know, but it was that idea that $100 a day just for laying there doing nothing, out of the goodness of people's hearts, just out of the strangers walking by, saying, we want to care for you, we want to help you, or something like that. And so he was a career bum and loved it. He liked it. And what I realized with that is that sometimes you can't get a person to make a shift or a change in their life. And what we've been talking about over the last few weeks is this idea that people will have a yearning, a desire inside them. They want to believe in something. We all have a desire to believe in things, whether it's a fairy tale or UFOs or Bigfoot. We all have this desire, this yearning to believe in unknown stuff. And the next new thing might be better than the thing I've currently got. But very few of us are able to make the changes necessary to shift our life in that direction. I'll mention one more personal story. I was in a Purdue dorm room in the Cary Quad. This was back in 1996. I was dating my wife, Jennifer. I was dating her at the time. She wasn't my wife then. Whatever. I was dating. How do you say that? Okay, so we weren't engaged. Okay, my girlfriend. So Jennifer was my girlfriend, and we were dating, and so I came here on Purdue's campus and found out that, lo and behold, on Purdue's campus, guys and girls can't spend the night in the same dorm. Woohoo! Of course, they break that rule all the time, but I'm glad that they had at least some standards back then. So anyway, I had to live in a guy's dorm in the Cary Quad, and I was happy to do so. She had a friend who happened to live in the Quad, and those of you guys who know about the Cary Quad know that there are some interesting personnel who live there. And so there's this one dorm room I was in, and I remember I was in there, and the guy's screensaver on his computer was just a series of pornography. One picture after another. And I saw things in that moment that I absolutely, to this day, can't get out of my brain. And I remember thinking, this is absolutely terrible. So he wasn't in the room, and I went over there and I turned off the monitor. Because, I mean, he didn't have, anyway, I turned it off, and I was like, oh. So the guy came in later on that night, and we had a conversation. And I didn't ask him about that. But I asked him just about his life, and we were talking a little bit. And eventually we got to the point where we were dealing with big questions about Christianity and whether or not he could believe. And I began to answer some of his questions. He said, well, what about this? And I answered some of them. And he said, yeah, that's exactly what I've heard before. And he asked me another one. I answered that one. He said, yeah, that's what I heard before. And eventually I said, it sounds to me like you know all the answers. He said, yeah, I know all the answers. I said, so what's keeping you? What's preventing you from making that decision? He says, I just can't take that leap of faith to cross that line. And then our conversation was completely different. It had to be, what does it take to actually make the leap to go from a place of I don't believe to a place of I do believe? And so there are some roadblocks that people have in their lives. And a lot of us have roadblocks that we're not even aware of. We put them in place just because they're comfortable. That's the way we live. That's the way we've chosen to live. And those roadblocks can actually be a huge problem for us. And so today we're going to deal with a couple of them. I've written them down on the bottom of the sheet, major roadblocks to Christianity. But before we get to those, and before we deal with some of the questions here today, I want to take you to a couple passages that sort of enlighten us with regard to the attitude we need to have when it comes to the questions that we face. And so the first page we're going to look up is John chapter 18. If you're using the Bibles we passed out, it's on page 753. We're looking up John 18, 28 through 38. And somehow I got that completely wrong. Wait a minute. Hold on. I'm the pastor and I flipped to Luke. Okay, John. Okay, here we go. John, chapter 18, 28. Here we go, I'm just going to read it. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You're right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this very reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" And they shout back, they ask for Barabbas, not Jesus, and Jesus ends up being crucified. But there's an interesting thing going on here with Pilate. He's got this question for Jesus. And his question begins with this idea of, what have you done? Are you actually a king, like they've said you claim to be? Now, I got to tell you something. Pilate doesn't care about the answer.